Have you ever wondered what happened to all that gold the most feared pirate in history supposedly left behind? People always say Edward Teach, better known as Blackbeard, never buried his treasure. They claim he died before he could hide his vast fortunes, or that he spent it, all on rum and powder. But what if I told you that the greatest pirate legend of all time was actually a carefully crafted lie designed to keep everyone away from a much darker truth? A few months ago, an archivist was combing through a pile of water-damaged, colonial records in a dusty basement in London. These were supposed to be boring ship manifests from the early 1700s, the kind of stuff nobody looks at twice. But tucked inside a leather ledger belonging to a disgraced British naval officer was a folded piece of heavy parchment. It was thick, greasy to the touch, and completely blank to the naked eye. Now, here is where it gets weird. The archivist accidentally left the parchment near a high-intensity halogen desk lamp. The sudden heat from the bulb reacted with the paper, and faint, rust-colored lines began to bleed through the surface. It was not just a random doodle. It was a highly detailed map, drawn using a crude form of invisible ink made from citrus juice and iron sulfate. And right at the bottom, marked with a heavy, deliberate hand, was a wax seal that made the archivist's blood run cold. It was the unmistakable emblem of Blackbeard's flagship, the Queen Anne's Revenge. But this was not your standard pirate treasure map with a big red X drawn on a sandy beach. Instead of islands and compass roses, the parchment was covered in bizarre cryptic symbols. We are talking about obscure alchemical signs, ancient constellation charts, and references to tidal patterns that absolutely did not match anything in the Atlantic Ocean. The historian quickly realized that Blackbeard had not just drawn a map. He had created a brilliant puzzle meant to weed out anyone who was not smart enough to solve it. Word quietly spread in a very tight circle of marine archaeologists, and a small, privately funded team was quickly assembled to crack the code. They spent weeks running the strange symbols through decryption algorithms, comparing them to old pirate ciphers and classified naval logs. What they found completely shattered everything we thought we knew about piracy in the Golden Age. The mathematical coordinates did not point to the sunny Caribbean or the coast of North Carolina, where Blackbeard violently met his end. Instead, the math directed them to a completely blank, empty patch of the ocean, hundreds of miles off any known commercial shipping lane. According to modern satellite imaging and global cartography, there was absolutely nothing there but deep, dark, freezing water. But the math on the map was simply too precise to be a mistake. Blackbeard was intentionally pointing to a phantom island, a place that modern maps say simply does not exist. The team had a massive choice to make: laugh it off as a dead man's drunken delusion, or charter a boat and sail into the absolute middle of nowhere to see exactly what Blackbeard was hiding. Getting a modern crew to sail into an uncharted dead zone is a lot harder than you might think. Experienced sailors are incredibly superstitious, and when you tell them you want to chase a 300-year-old ghost island, drawn by a man who used to light matches under his hat to look like a literal demon, they tend to aggressively decline. But eventually, the researchers found a captain crazy enough to take the job, and they set off on a retrofitted trawler packed to the brim, with military-grade sonar gear and deep-sea diving equipment. The journey was supposed to take 4 days. For the first 3, the ocean was completely calm, almost unnervingly flat, like a pane of dark glass. But as they approached the exact coordinates extracted from the ancient cipher, the weather violently and suddenly turned. A freak squall swallowed the ship, plunging them into a thick, disorienting gray fog that completely jammed their GPS and satellite radios. The captain was flying entirely blind, relying purely on the old analog compass, which had inexplicably started spinning wildly as if caught in a massive magnetic anomaly. And the most unsettling part? This localized magnetic interference was actually predicted on Blackbeard's map. The pirate had not just found a random island. He had deliberately chosen a geological freak of nature, a place surrounded by a natural navigational shield that made traditional compasses completely useless. That is exactly why nobody had stumbled upon it in the modern era. After hours of battling aggressive swells in zero visibility, hoping they wouldn't crash into unseen rocks. The thick fog suddenly broke, like a heavy curtain being pulled back on a stage. And there it was, a jagged, heavily forested landmass jutting aggressively out of the dark water. It did not look tropical or inviting. It looked distinctly hostile. The cliffs were made of sharp black volcanic rock, completely untouched by human development or time. The researchers stood on the deck, absolutely speechless. They were looking at an island that had successfully hidden from the entire world for centuries. But the real shock came when they dropped anchor and took small inflatable zodiacs toward the only accessible cove. As the water cleared closer to the dark sandy shore, the sonar operator started shouting in a panic. The seabed was not made of sand or coral. It was literally paved with shipwrecks. We are not talking about one or two unlucky fishing boats. There were at least a dozen massive wooden hulls rotting beneath the waves, their giant rib cages sticking out of the mud like the bones of dead leviathans. Some of them looked like heavily armed Spanish galleons, while others had the distinct build of British man-o'-wars. Blackbeard had not just hidden his island, he had turned it into a deadly, unavoidable trap for anyone who tried to follow him. The cove was a natural bottleneck, heavily loaded with hidden razor-sharp reefs that would completely tear the bottom out of any large vessel that did not know the exact winding safe passage outlined on the secret map. Stepping onto the black sand, Beach felt like walking onto an alien planet. The air was incredibly thick, humid, and completely silent, eerily stripped of the usual sounds of seagulls, insects, or wildlife. The expedition team immediately started hacking their way through the dense, tangled jungle canopy, carefully following the next set of encrypted clues on the parchment. The map did not lead them to a soft patch of dirt to start digging. It led them up a steep, treacherous, and slippery incline toward a massive network of natural limestone caves carved directly into the side of the towering mountain. But as they approached the looming entrance of the main cavern, they realized Blackbeard's paranoia ran far deeper than they ever could have imagined. The mouth of the cave was not just a natural dark hole. It had been heavily and intentionally modified. The rock walls were scarred with deep, straight cuts, proving beyond a shadow of a doubt that human hands had been at work here centuries ago. And right at the threshold, half buried in the damp, rotting soil, was a human skull. But it was not just lying there by chance. It was brutally pinned to a heavy wooden post by a massive rusted iron spike. This was a classic pirate warning, a gruesome "keep out" sign left perfectly intact by the passage of time. As the researchers turned on their high-powered tactical flashlights and stepped into the crushing, oppressive darkness of the cave, the ambient temperature dropped instantly, sending shivers down their spines. The air inside smelled horribly stale, like copper, dried salt, and wet earth. They walked in a single file line, carefully checking the ground with every single step, because the map had a specific, terrifying warning symbol right at this section. And it is a very good thing they were incredibly careful. Just 20 feet into the winding tunnel, the lead archaeologist stopped dead in his tracks, his breath catching in his throat. Stretched tightly across the uneven floor at ankle height, almost entirely blended into the dark dirt, was a thick braided wire made of solid brass, a material that crucially does not rust easily in damp air. It was a tripwire, but this was not some primitive jungle trap that dropped a spiked log. By slowly tracing the wire up the cavern wall to the ceiling, they found a massive, crumbling wooden pulley mechanism holding back tons of loose, jagged boulders. If anyone had tripped that wire 300 years ago or even today, the entire tunnel roof would have violently collapsed, burying the intruders alive under crushing rock. Blackbeard was not just a thief. He was a brilliant, incredibly ruthless engineer. He wanted to make absolutely sure that if he could not have whatever was hidden at the exact end of this cave, nobody else would ever see the light of day again. The team painstakingly stepped over the deadly wire and continued deeper into the belly of the island, their flashlight beams cutting through the thick, swirling dust. The deeper they went, the more they realized this was not just a temporary hiding spot. It was a subterranean fortress. They found old, rotting, Wooden barricades, rusted flintlock pistols carelessly discarded on the ground, and more bones. So many human bones. It became painfully obvious to everyone in the room that whoever Blackbeard brought with him to dig these tunnels and build this place never left the island alive. Navigating the massive cave system felt like walking through a twisted, dangerous funhouse designed by an absolute madman. The main winding tunnel eventually opened up into a massive underground grotto, a cavern so unfathomably large that their strongest flashlight beams barely even reached the rocky ceiling. A violent underground river cut directly through the center of the dark room, plunging into a pitch-black, roaring abyss that seemed to have no bottom. But across the roaring, freezing water, sitting perfectly centered on a raised, natural stone platform, was exactly what they came for. There were no cartoonish wooden treasure chests, overflowing with shiny gold coins and rubies like you see in the movies. Those would have rotted away to nothing centuries ago in this environment. Instead, there was a series of heavy, meticulously crafted lead-lined lockboxes, sealed tightly shut with thick, unyielding iron chains. Lead does not corrode or decay the same way iron or wood does, making it the absolute perfect material for long-term waterproof preservation in a damp, salty environment. The team managed to cross the dangerous river using modern rock climbing gear, their hearts pounding violently against their ribs with every slippery step. This was the moment of truth. They were about to open a literal time capsule left behind by the absolute devil of the seas himself. Using portable, high-pressure hydraulic cutters, they snapped the ancient, rusted chains with a loud crack and slowly popped the heavy lid off the first box. What was inside completely and utterly redefined the historical legacy of Edward Teach. Yes, there was immense wealth, but it was not the scattered, random plunder of poor merchant ships. The box contained heavily tarnished, impossibly heavy silver ingots, perfectly stamped with the official royal seal of the Spanish crown. This meant Blackbeard had somehow miraculously hijacked a royal treasury shipment, a crime so massive and brazen it would have triggered a global world war if it was ever discovered by the authorities. But the stolen silver was not even the most shocking part. Tucked safely beneath the heavy metal ingots were several thick, heavy, leather-bound books, wrapped tightly in waterproof oilcloth to protect them from the harsh moisture. When the historian carefully, with shaking hands, peeled back the rotting cloth, he found fragile documents covered in elegant, aristocratic handwriting. These were not drunken pirate logs. They were highly classified, top-secret letters written by high-ranking British, French, and Spanish officials. Some contained incredibly detailed naval fleet schedules, while others held dark, damning, ruinous secrets about colonial governors taking massive bribes, committing treason against their kings, and engaging in highly illegal, off-the-book slave trading. This is where it all finally clicked for the researchers. Blackbeard did not just rule the seas through brutal fear and random violence. He was running a massive, high-stakes international blackmail operation. He had systematically collected enough dirt on the most powerful, untouchable men in the world to completely destroy their empires overnight. That is exactly why they hunted him down so violently. That is why the Royal Navy spared absolutely no expense to trap him and cut off his head. They were not trying to stop a pirate from stealing rum. They were desperately trying to silence a man who knew way too much. The historical weight of this underground discovery is almost impossible to fully comprehend. For centuries, the world eagerly viewed Blackbeard as a bloodthirsty brute, a wild, uneducated animal who operated purely on violent instinct and primal greed. But the shocking contents of that lead box paint a terrifyingly different, far more sophisticated picture. He was a master tactician, a brilliant extortionist, and a dangerous man who literally held the fragile fates of entire European nations in his calloused, unwashed hands. The true treasure on this Phantom Island was never just monetary, it was leverage. It was absolute, terrifying power over the elites of the 18th century. As the expedition team carefully documented, photographed, and packed the priceless artifacts into secure, waterproof cases to slowly transport back to the ship, a deeply unsettling, heavy feeling washed over all of them. The sheer massive scale of this underground vault strongly suggested that this room was just one tiny fraction of his overall hoard. If Blackbeard had gone through the insane trouble of finding a magnetic dead zone, building an elaborate tunnel-collapsing death trap, and brutally silencing his own loyal crew just to hide a few boxes of blackmail material, what else did he bury in the dark? The island itself is geologically massive, and the cave system noticeably branches off into dozens of other unexplored pitch-black tunnels that plunge even deeper into the dangerous volcanic rock. The researchers know they barely even scratched the surface of what is really down there. But time was rapidly running out. The barometric pressure on their instruments was dropping incredibly fast, signaling that another brutal, unpredictable storm was quickly closing in on the island's shores. The natural, violent defense mechanism of this forgotten place was actively waking up again, threatening to permanently trap the modern explorers, just like the doomed sailors whose bleached bones littered the cove outside. They had to immediately evacuate, leaving the dark, silent depths behind them. Now, the recovered artifacts are being painstakingly studied in a highly secure, undisclosed laboratory, and the modern governments whose ancestors are mentioned in those ancient damning letters are likely having very uncomfortable, hushed conversations behind closed doors right now. Blackbeard has been dead for well over 300 years. But he is somehow still causing absolute chaos from beyond the grave. The legendary map has been decoded, the impossible ghost island has been found, and the world-shaking truth is finally out in the open. But here is the most chilling, terrifying part of it all. At the very bottom of the newly discovered pile of documents, written clearly in Blackbeard's own distinct, aggressive handwriting, is a short, incredibly cryptic sentence that points directly to yet another set of mathematical coordinates. It seems the devil of the seas played a much, much larger game than anyone in history ever realized. If this heavily fortified, trap-filled island was just his starting point, his mere opening move, you really have to wonder, what exactly is waiting for us at the dark end of the line? And more importantly, are we truly, honestly ready to uncover the kind of world-breaking secrets that history tried so desperately to bury forever?